Okay, I'm going to begin by Maya Angelou with a recitation of one stanza of one poem. And we'll come to this poem again later in the presentation this morning. It's called Alone, but it's about not being alone. Lying, thinking last night how to find my soul a home where water is not thirsty and bread loaf is not stone. I came up with one thing, and I don't think I'm wrong. Nobody, but nobody can make it out here alone. So this is one of the theses of her life, that we are in this journey called humanity together, and that we would do well to be sensitive, be open, be joyful, be embracing of everything that life gives us and that we encounter, and move forward together. And that nobody, but nobody, can make it out here alone. Maya Angelou, in contradistinction with Mary Oliver, is not the most what should we say, the best-selling poet. The best-selling poet, and I have to look this up to verify it, but for a while there were two people vying for the status of best-selling poet, Mary Oliver or Rumi. Rumi's been dead for at least 7.5 centuries. But Maya Angelou, in contradistinction to those two people, Mary Oliver and Rumi, could arguably be described as the most popular poet in America. She's accessible. She writes rhyming poetry. She is engageable. She writes free verse that is almost always about something that matters and that is central to what it means to be a human being, especially in the North American context. Although she does have a global attraction and a global reach with her thinking, her heart, her emotions, and her life. You'll see that she was born on the 4th of April, 1928. This is 1 half year before Martin Luther King is born on January 15th, 1929. But that April the 4th date is very, very significant, and it'll come up later on when we look at her journey, as we look at her journey. She was born Marguerite Ann Johnson, one of 2 children to Bailey Johnson and Vivian Baxter Johnson in St. Louis, Missouri. Her older brother Bailey gives her her name of Maya, probably one of those things where a sibling couldn't pronounce the name of the other sibling, and it came out Maya, and it stuck. Her parents' marriage ends in Long Beach, California in 1931, and she and her brother are sent to live with her paternal grandmother, Annie Henderson, whom Maya will call Mama. And this takes place in Stamps, Arkansas. In 1937, not 1935. Let me just preface this. 1935, she returns to St. Louis to live with her mother. In 1937, there in St. Louis, she is raped. Look at the age. She's not but 9 years old, 8.5 years old. She's raped by her mother's boyfriend. And after the attacker's sudden and violent death, because she says what was done to her, and the family takes it into their own hands, and that attacker dies, she does not speak for 5 years. And she returns to Arkansas to live with her grandmother, develops extraordinary memory and also appreciation of literature. And she's influenced at that time by a teacher, Bertha Flowers, to expand her world through reading, and she begins finally to speak. In 1941, she'll move with her brother to San Francisco to live with her mother. She attends George Washington High School. She studies dance and drama at the California Labor School. In 1942, she will become the first African-American cable car conductor. Remember, this is San Francisco, okay? And that's quite a distinction, by the way. She was usually very proud to talk about that distinctive attribute of her career trajectory. She graduates from high school in 43. This is in the middle of World War II. She gives birth to her son, Clyde Johnson, who later will go by Guy. And in several video clips around her funeral that takes place, you can see him and hear him give testimony to what a great mother she was. She works as a waitress as well as a cook, but also, let me just add this, and I won't go into graphic details on this, but she works as a sex worker. She works first as a madam, coordinating tricks, and then later herself as a sex worker. In 1948, she has this kind of epiphany. She has a realization of her death and also the impossibility of putting it off or thwarting it. And she experiences a great release, kind of like with an encounter with her finitude and her mortality. She's freed to really live her life. She'll marry Anastasios Tash Angelos, a Greek sailor, and the marriage will dissolve eventually, and she takes the name, though, of Angelou, and she begins a career as a nightclub singer. She'll be on television. She'll eventually record an album called Calypso Lady in 57. In 54, that is a big year. She has the divorce. She starts singing in the Purple Onion Club. She appears as Ruby in a version of Porgy and Bess. She studies dance with Martha Graham. She dances with the Alvin Ailey troupe on television. And she meets James Baldwin in Paris. That's quite a year. You'd remember that. She is barely 26 years old. All right? Pretty interesting. In 58, she will move to New York, and she joins the Harlem Writers Guild there. She's part of the kind of the Harlem Renaissance. She sings at clubs. She also will sing at the Apollo Theater in Harlem. And in 59, she will produce an off-Broadway play, Cabaret for Freedom, as a fundraiser for the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, which, by the way, had been created in 1957. I mean, this is fairly new in the civil rights movement in America. She will marry for the second time in 1960, Vusumuzi Make, a South African civil rights activist. She'll move to Cairo, Egypt, and she becomes a journalist editing the Arab Observer. In 61, the following year, she teaches at the University of Ghana's School of Music and Drama. She serves as a feature editor for the Africa Review, and she meets Malcolm X. That's all in 61. In 64, she returns to the U.S. to assist Malcolm X in what was called the Organization of African American Unity. Not quite a year later, Malcolm X is assassinated, at which time also Martin Luther King appoints her as the coordinator for the northern branch of SCLC. In 68, on her birthday, Martin Luther King is assassinated. And she will, during the entirety of the rest of Coretta Scott King's life, she will not celebrate her birthday on April the 4th in honor of King's passing, and she will call up Coretta and commiserate with her and comfort her and talk with her and listen. But she will not celebrate her birthday for all of that time. In 1969, she begins her career as a writer with the publication of I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings. This is the first of 7 memoirs or autobiographical volumes that she will eventually produce. In 1971, she publishes her very first book of poems called Just Give Me a Cool Drink of Water 'Fore I Die. In 1972, she writes a movie script, Georgia, Georgia, first script by an African-American woman ever made into a movie. In 1997, many people will remember that she appeared in the miniseries Roots and is nominated for an Emmy. She'll marry for the third time Paul Dufew. She moves to California. At that time, she joins Glide Memorial Church in San Francisco. About 3 years later, she experiences her third divorce. In 81, she becomes a professor at Wake Forest University in North Carolina, and she joins the second church. She doesn't give up the Glide Memorial Association and membership, but becomes a member of the Mount Zion Baptist Church in Winston-Salem. She will meet Oprah Winfrey, and they mutually kind of make each other more famous than they ever were before. Oprah Winfrey really views her almost like a second mother, and Maya Angelou experiences Oprah kind of like the daughter she never had. In 1993, at the inauguration of President Clinton, she will deliver the inaugural poem on the pulse of mourning. And we'll hear a little bit of that later on in this presentation. And it is powerful. Not since Robert Frost had delivered a poem at John F. Kennedy's inauguration had a poet been commissioned to give an inaugural poem, but she did. 5 years later, she will also, 2 years later, she'll deliver a special poem called The Brave and Startling Truth, and some of you may have seen that little booklet. It is a poem commemorating the 50th anniversary of the United Nations. She receives the National Medal of Arts from the United States in the year 2000. In 2002, she has a very interesting experience, and this is another connection with Kansas City, not just Missouri. She comes into an agreement with Hallmark Cards, and she debuts the Maya Angelou Life Mosaic Collection of products. And I once knew somebody who worked with her and her agent on what she wanted to have produced and sold, etc. In 2011, she will receive the Presidential Medal of Freedom from Barack Obama. In 2013, she does the last of her quasi-autobiographical pieces called Mom and Me and Mom. And then on the 28th of May, she dies in Winston-Salem. There are 3 memorial services for her. One at her church in North Carolina, Mount Zion, on the 29th of May. And then there's a private memorial service. Private is put in quotes there because I believe President Clinton and Hillary Clinton are both present at that moment at the Waite Chapel at Winston-Salem at Wake Forest University. And then that's on June the 7th and June 15th. There's a memorial service at Glide Memorial Church in San Francisco. So these are pictures of her when she's a little girl. The upper left-hand corner is when she's, I think, 3 years old. On the far left in the middle, I don't know if this is 10 or 11, but this is shortly after she was raped and was just silent for the longest time. Then she goes into being a cabaret singer. You see that in the lower left-hand corner, and the first picture just adjacent to her childhood picture. She will meet James Baldwin in Paris. Remember, we went through that. She'll also meet Malcolm X in Africa. She will meet Gloria Steinem, which is the center bottom picture, and be part of a march that she is participating in. I put a picture of her writing, and it is the largest, almost the largest picture on the page, because this is where she gets her greatest fame. Not dancing, not acting, not singing. She had a lovely voice, but writing and putting into paper what she wanted to express. There's the picture of her with Cicely Tyson in the TV miniseries Roots, her special relationship with Coretta Scott King, then the inaugural day delivery of On the Pulse of Morning. That's a picture of her at the podium. And this is the picture of her son, Guy Johnson. And I'm not exactly sure when that was, but she was in good health, etc. Picture of Oprah Winfrey, her wonderful friend, also with Alicia Keys. And they're celebrating in her very old age, her vibrancy, her aliveness, but also her gifts to so many people. And there you see Barack Obama in giving her the Medal of Freedom and giving her a kiss on the cheek. And then this is in the last year of her life with her hats, or what could be called a crown. So just keep that slide on for a little bit, Brent. Let me tell you a story. I got to meet her in 1992. Ministers always need a reprieve from normal duties. And there was a conference that was held at once in New York City at Trinity Episcopal Church. And then it was at the cathedral, the Episcopal Cathedral in San Francisco. One week it was in New York, and another week it was in San Francisco. I had a friend in Berkeley that I was going to visit. So I flew out to San Francisco to get away, to have, as I said, a little reprieve. A brief respite from normal duties, and it was pretty heady. It was called the God With Us Conference, and Frederick Buechner was one of the speakers, and Maya Angelou was the next. The very first day of presentations, Frederick Buechner got up to present, and I said, "Oh, this is really a mistake of the people who put this together. This is horrible. I mean, you should start with Maya Angelou and let Frederick Buechner kind of maybe be a commentator." Buechner blew our socks off. He was awesome. His extraordinary humility, his great stories, his insight, and his honesty, brute honesty, was so beautiful. We had a break, then dinner, and then we came back for an evening session, the very first day of sessions. And Maya Angelou said, in her first remarks, she said, "Do you understand now?" No, I'm sorry. I'm telling this all wrong. Maya Angelou went first, and then Buechner came second. And I thought it was really wrong that you should open with the weaker one and finish with the stronger one. The next morning, she got up and she went first again. And she said, "Do you see now why I requested not to have to follow Frederick Buechner?" And we all did. We all did. So she had a great amount of humility, wonderful storytelling. And we even got to see a reconciliation in that very conference when somebody who had been very estranged from her in her days in San Francisco was in the audience, and they had a reconciliation on stage. Just full of humanity she was. Well, here's where you start. I suggest that you start with her autobiographical works, the very first one being I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings, and proceeding across the top. This is in chronological order in which she published them. Gather Together in My Name, Singing and Swinging and Getting Merry Like Christmas, The Heart of a Woman, All God's Children Need Traveling Shoes, A Song Flung Up to Heaven, and then finally, Mom and Me and Mom. But you can also start, next slide, with her poetry. Just Give Me a Cool Drink Before I Die. That was her very first one. Oh, Pray My Wings Are Gonna Fit Me Well. That's another one. Maybe the most famous of her books of poems is And Still I Rise. And that is a very, very famous poem, if you have not heard it, it kind of goes like the following. You may write me down in history with your bitter, twisted lies. You may trod me in the very dirt, but still like dust I rise. Does my sassiness upset you? Why are you beset with gloom? Because I walk like I've got oil wells pumping in my living room, just like moons and like suns with the certainty of tides, just like hope springing high, still I rise. Did you want to see me broken, bowed head and lowered eyes, shoulders falling down like teardrops, weakened by my soulful cries? Does my haughtiness offend you? Don't you take it awful hard, because I laugh like I've got gold mines digging in my own backyard. So it goes on for several more stanzas, and that refrain, and still I rise, and still I rise, and still I rise. So that is maybe one of her most famous poems, and Still I Rise. But all of the others, they're all wonderful and they're all accessible. She writes both rhyming and free verse. I would point you to the final book on the lower right-hand corner called The Complete Poems, and it has the inaugural poem in it. The poem that has in its last refrain, on the pulse of morning, that's the name of the poem, these words: here on the pulse of this new day, you may have the grace to look up and out and into your sister's eyes and into your brother's face, your country, and say simply, very simply, with hope, good morning. And I think I've done a fairly decent rendition of her inflection in that poem on that day. But I would suggest for your library at the church that you purchase at least the complete collected poems of Maya Angelou, and then also that very first of her autobiographical pieces, the very first one, if you can go back one slide, I Know Why the Cage Bird Sings. Those are two great volumes for you to have in your church library. But you can also purchase any of these essays collections. She's got three. Wouldn't Take Nothing for My Journey Now, and Even the Stars Look Lonesome, and Letter to My Daughter, which she wrote, by the way, to a daughter she never had, but because so many women said that she had mothered them, that she had blessed them with her guidance and her inspiration. And so she wrote, it wasn't just to Oprah Winfrey, it was to the daughter she never had, she said. And but she wanted to bequeath her thoughts and her hopes. She also, though, published 2 cookbooks, and they are full of wisdom as well as anecdotes and recipes. And she loved to cook, she loved to entertain, and she did 2 of those. You can also, there's kind of 3 biographies of her. Those are on the upper right-hand corner. The African American Icon series, The Adventurous Spirit, that's fairly decent. That book is fairly thorough, but the most recent biography is in the lower right-hand corner. But very accessible book that could be used as a Lenten study or even an Advent study, this 40-day journey with Maya Angelou. There's a similar kind of book for a journey with Howard Thurman, by the way. There's children's books galore, and I've only listed 2 of them here on the lower left-hand corner. And they're picture books, but they hold up for anybody, but especially little Black girls and teenage Black girls, this exemplar of overcoming and great fortitude. There's a ton of internet resources, and we're going to see this very first one in just a minute. It's only about 3 minutes and 20 seconds long. There's a piece of her doing this calypso music from a television program in 1957. There's her performing Still I Rise. That's 2 minutes and 15 minutes long. There's interviews with Mavis Nicholson, and it's a pretty long one, and that's a British broadcast. She's got a commencement address at Spelman College that is just riveting. And she does a poem and a song in this, during this 25 minutes, that is a bidding auction for slaves. And she transforms that as an attainment of dignity and defiance and reality. I would commend that one to you. That's from 1992. Then there's the inaugural poem, and it's all of it. It's from, I think, the very beginning of her introduction of her, and then she gives the poem. An interview with Charlie Rose. I know that he's out of fashion, and rightfully so, but it is a good interview, and she describes in that her writing process, how when she is pressed to do a writing project, and usually, you get a contract and get a deadline. Remember what Louis Armstrong said, don't ask me to be creative, just give me a deadline. And she needed a deadline too, all writers do, and she did. She would get a bottle of sherry, lots of pens, lots of notebooks to write in, and she'd order room service. She'd go to a hotel. She didn't write at home. She had a desk and she had a study, but she would go to a hotel there in Winston-Salem, and she'd give herself to the writing. There's also a pretty good interview with George Stroumboulopoulos, and this is a Canadian television show. But we're going to see right now, in her wizened state in her 80s, this extraordinary gift of what you should do with your life, how you should live, and her 3-word advice about what to do.
And I would just tell them, that's
maybe the hardest part is if you teach, you have to live your teaching. You can't say, you do not as I do, but do as I say. No. You have to say, I'm doing my best to live what I teach. I have a painting by Phoebe of a group that she calls Sister Suki's Funeral. And all the women, there are about 9 women, and they all look like women in my grandmother's prayer meeting group. So whenever I'm obliged to do something, I take that painting and I look at that painting. There's an empty chair. And I think, now what would Grandma do? What would she say? I can almost hear her voice say, now, sister, you know what's right. Just do right. You don't really have to ask anybody. The truth is, right may not be expedient. It may not be profitable, but it will satisfy your soul. It brings you the kind of protection that bodyguards can't give you. Try to be all you can be, to be the best human being you can be. Try to be that in your church, in your temple. Try to be that in your classroom. Do it because it is right to do. You see, people will know you, and they will add their prayers to your life. They'll wish you well. I think if your name is mentioned and people say, oh hell, oh damn, I think you're doing something wrong. But if your name is mentioned and people say, oh, she's so sweet, he's so nice, oh, God bless her, there you are. So try to live your life in a way that you will not regret years of useless virtue and inertia and timidity. Take up the battle. Take it up. It's yours. This is your life. This is your world. I'll be leaving it long before you under the ordinary set of circumstances. You make your own choices. You can decide life isn't worth living. And that would be the worst thing you can do. How do you know? So far. Try it. See. So pick it up. Pick up the battle and make it a better world. Just where you are. Yes. And it can be better. And it must be better. But it is up to us.
Challenges, does she not? With that admonition to not spend our lives, she says, with useless inertia and timidity, and useless virtue, she says, useless virtue and inertia and timidity, meaning virtue that is not enacted, is not enfleshed, is not done, as she says, picking up the world and doing our part to make it better. That's useless virtue. Plus, it's full of inertia and finally timidity, and that we can all overcome those detractions from our life. They are both detractions and distractions. So I'm not exactly sure how old she was when she gave those wonderful 3 words, just do right. And, but I'm pretty sure it was in her 80s. Remember, she was 86 when she passed. So I'm pretty sure that it was sometime between the year 2010 and 2014 when she passed. Well, I think that the genius of Maya Angelou very quickly can be summarized in the following way. She was a Renaissance woman, singer, dancer, actor, playwright, screenwriter, composer, director, journalist, scholar, activist, philanthropist, and then she becomes a memoirist, a poet, an essayist, and a cook all along. She's an artist and an activist. She has both what Muhammad Ali would call the me and the we portions of the quotient for human life down pat. She has done interior investigation, self analysis, but also she's participated in the communal, collective enterprises to make the world better. She was part of the Harlem Renaissance, as well as the Organization of African American Unity. There's the artist and the activist. She would dance with Alvin Ailey and also Martha Graham, but also she was the leader of the Northern branch of SCLC, activist. She is a famous celebrity. Almost everybody who sees her face can normally say, oh, that's that person, Maya something, and they don't know how to pronounce her last name, but then finally they'll get it. She's a famous celebrity, but she has an uncommonly kind, common touch. And I think you saw that in the video that we just watched. She is an inclusive Christian. We'll get to that a little bit in greater depth in just a moment. She's open and straightforward about her Christian heritage, but she is also unabashedly affirming of the dignity and giftedness of all persons of all faiths. This, I think, is the gist and grit of Maya Angelou. She has universality and commonality in a kind of wonderful, magical combination. There is a universality and commonality among all people. In one of her poems called Human Family, she writes, "We are more alike, my friends, than we are unalike." And she uses that refrain continuously and repeatedly toward the end of the poem. We are more alike, my friends, than we are unalike. She also has a robust, healthy undying, unflagging belief in community. To be a fully developing human being, we abide in community. And you heard me share the poem earlier. Nobody can make it out here alone. And she also has a wonderful emphasis upon elegance. She herself, you could hear it in her diction, could you not? The way that she even pronounces words is full of elegance. We are called to experience and express the joyful, ecstatic, elegant realities of human experience. On the Today Show, I once heard her say this. She may have said it elsewhere, but I got to, in real time one morning, or what passed for real time in the Central Standard Time Zone, I got to hear her repeat these words, say them, enunciate this reality. Surviving is nice, but thriving, that is elegant. So she contrasted surviving and thriving with the emphasis upon thriving. And I think that's a big part of her gist and grit. She has a wide embrace in her faith. She has repeated this in one interview after another. She tells this story about being startled and taken aback when people come up to her and say, they tell that they're Christians. And this is in the context of probably trying to establish a bond. I could imagine some mean person not liking her inclusivity and her universal kind of emphasis, saying, I'm trying to pin her down about what kind of Christian she is. But they just come up saying, you know, or kindly saying, we're Christians too, and trying to establish a bond. And her response is, already? You're already a Christian? Wow. Faith for her is a developmental art. She also believed always in prayer's efficacy. And this is true beyond the muteness that she experienced when she was a kid after her rape, beyond broken relationships, her marriages and divorces, beyond the historic ravages and legacy of racism, even into her 80s, it should say, she continued to believe in prayer's efficacy. I know that when I pray, something wonderful happens, not only for the person that I'm praying for, but also for me. I am being heard. These are scenes of also the embrace of her faith. In the upper left-hand corner was the first of the memorial services. This is a kind of bird's eye view, fisheye lens, actually, in Winston-Salem at the Mount Zion Baptist Church. And then about a week later, there was another service at the Wake Forest Chapel. And this is the one where the Clintons were in attendance, as well as Oprah Winfrey. And then the Glide Memorial Church in San Francisco. I have put in the box, however, a memorial service that was held at the Riverside Church, and it is long. It's over almost 3 hours long. It's 2 hours and 55 minutes long, but you can find it. It's on YouTube, and in there you'll see a beautiful tribute given by Hillary Clinton, and this is in 2015. This is a year after, I believe. I couldn't definitively find that to be the case, but I believe it is a year after her death. And there is also Toni Morrison. Toni Morrison gives a tribute to her in this clip, and I would commend you to check that out. There we are with Maya Angelou, and as I say, time's yours. Questions, answers, commentary. Some of you, I'm sure, have been at book readings or conferences where you enjoyed Maya Angelou. I would love to hear how you experienced that, and or your own reading of her poetry or her memoirs. I think that all of them can be a benefit to you and can expand your life. So one of the things that she said about Martin Luther King, and this was in 2013. This is a year before she passes, all right? She said these words: can you imagine if, this is 50 years after he delivered the I Have a Dream speech in the March on Washington in '63. So this is 50 years afterward. 1 year before she passes, she says these words. She's so cogent, she's so clear. Can you imagine if we did not have this undergirded hate and racism, prejudice, sexism, and ageism? If we were not crippled by these idiocies, can you imagine what our country would be like? So she does, in a genius fashion, critiquing where we need to improve, but also holding out hope for what we might become. And that may be part of her genius as an artist, as a writer, and as a human being, that she could tell a truth that would be about something that was very harmful to the human community, but also hold out hope for how we could be much better, much better. One last thing. I was thinking about this. It was from Fred Craddock that I learned about Frederick Robinson. Never heard about him. You know, you learn from great souls about other great souls. So I learned about Frederick Robinson from Fred Craddock. From Gardner C. Taylor, somebody we're not investigating during this series, but one of my great heroes, I learned about all the great Scottish and British preachers. Well, Gardner Taylor is arguably the greatest African-American preacher who ever drew breath on American soil. But it was from him that I learned about a forebearer, predecessor, great preachers such as R.W. Dale, Alexander McLaren, and these kind of folks. And it was from Maya Angelou that I learned about County Cullen, part of the Harlem Renaissance. And I want to commend for you the poem called Incident. It's called Incident, and it's about his riding on a bus in Baltimore. Check that out. Look it up on your computer right now if you want to. And just remember where you got this on this Sunday morning. And I remember that Maya Angelou commended that poem for me to read and to investigate. It's not a long poem, but it's one of County Cullen's most popular. Incident. I'll repeat the last stanza there. I saw the whole of Baltimore from May until December. Of all the things that happened there, that's all I remember. So from a great soul like Maya Angelou, or anybody that you pick, you will learn about other great figures and great souls that also can enrich your life, broaden your horizon, deepen your understanding, stretch your faith, and get you to where you need to be. So one of the I keep on saying one more last thing. So one more last thing, and then I'll be open to questions, anything you want to talk about. I think Maya Angelou shows us what I like to call interior integrity. That when you know who you are, it's probably akin to that experience of her that she was going to die, that death was unavoidable, and then that freed her to live. But it's more than that. She knows who she is, the teacher in Arkansas that helped her overcome her muteness after being raped. And by the way, why did she become mute? She recalled later in her memoirs, she thought by telling her family that about the guy who raped her, that she had killed him because he died. I mean, the people who heard the story went out and they did kill him. violently. And it was called vigilante justice, if you will. She didn't want to ever have that kind of power come forth from her mouth to cause the death of anybody, even a rapist. I mean, she was overwhelmed by the power of words. And so that's why she went mute, she said. But she thankfully gathered the capacity to speak and to be unmuted and to share. And she went forth after overcoming that, and she got healed to a degree. And I think her whole life is this journey towards interior integrity, to know who you are, as we say in the religious realm, to know who you are and whose you are, and to know what you're connected, which community of care and nurture you're connected with, and what your purpose is, and to feel comfortable inside, and live with that, and be strengthened by it. I think she has, in ways that a lot of writers almost never have, this sense of strong interior integrity.